I never planned on getting into a war with a homeowners association. I moved to the countryside for peace and quiet, to escape the madness of city life and settle into a slower, simpler rhythm. I found 10 acres of land on the outskirts of a small suburban neighborhood, built my house, fenced off an area for my goats, and planted some crops. It was perfect. No traffic, no blaring sirens, no nosy neighbors breathing down my neck. Just fresh air, open fields, and the occasional sound of my goats munching on grass. Life was good. Until the morning, everything changed. I stepped out onto my porch with a hot cup of coffee, taking in the early sun stretching across my land. The birds were chirping, the air was crisp, and for a moment it felt like any other day. Then I saw it. A brand new sign planted right at the edge of my property near the road. Bold lettering, professional design, future community park, no trespassing except for HOA members. My stomach dropped. I nearly choked on my coffee as I stormed toward the sign, gripping the post and yanking it out of the ground. This had to be a mistake. Maybe some overzealous HOA member put it in the wrong spot. After all, I had never been part of their HOA. That was one of the reasons I bought this land in the first place. No one could tell me how to trim my grass or where to park my truck. This was my land, and I had made sure to keep it that way. But before I could even turn back to my house, a silver SUV rolled up and came to a sharp stop. The door swung open, and out stepped the most stereotypical HOA representative I had ever seen. Linda, that was her real name, but in my head she would always be Karen Clone number 5000. She had the sharp bob haircut, the overpriced athleisure outfit, and that expression people get when they live for the thrill of making someone else's life miserable. She slammed the door, marched toward me, and pointed at the sign now lying in the grass. "You cannot remove that sign," she snapped before she even reached me. "That is HOA property." I raised an eyebrow, still holding the wooden post. "Funny, I thought it was on my property." She crossed her arms, her smirk confident. "It is community property now. The HOA has designated it as a public recreational space. You will be receiving an official notice soon." I let out a slow breath. "Linda, this is not HOA land. This is my private property." She barely blinked. "Not anymore. The HOA has reviewed our jurisdiction and determined that due to a zoning technicality, your land now falls under our governance. You will need to remove all livestock and unauthorized structures within 30 days. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if she was serious. "My livestock? You mean my goats?" "Yes," she said with a look of disgust. "Livestock is not allowed under HOA regulations." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "Linda, I do not live in the HOA. She waved a piece of paper in front of me, her smirk never faltering. "That is debatable. We will discuss it at the next meeting." Then she spun on her heel, climbed back into her car, and drove off, leaving me standing there with my coffee in a growing sense of rage. A few days later, the official letter arrived. "Dear homeowner, as part of the HOA's commitment to maintaining a safe and aesthetically pleasing community, we are formally annexing your land under HOA jurisdiction. Per HOA guidelines, all livestock must be removed and any unauthorized structures must be taken down. You are also required to submit landscaping plans for approval and pay a monthly HOA fee of $400. Failure to comply will result in fines and possible legal action." I read the letter twice, then a third time. Then I laughed. They wanted me to pay them to take my own land from me. That was it. They had picked the wrong farmer. The war began the moment I decided I was not going to roll over and let a group of power-hungry homeowners dictate what I could do on my own land. A few days after the ridiculous letter arrived, I woke up to find something even worse. My fence had been cut. The wooden posts had been slashed clean through, and the wire had been pulled apart, leaving a wide-open gap. My goats, confused but opportunistic, had wandered right out onto the neighborhood walking trail. I had barely thrown on my boots before I heard shouting. By the time I got to the scene, a couple of joggers were standing there, looking horrified, as if they had just encountered a pack of wild wolves instead of a few harmless goats sniffing at the grass. Then the HOA enforcers showed up. Linda, of course, led the charge, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they had been summoned from a country club emergency meeting. She waved a printed notice in my face, her expression a mix of fake concern and thinly veiled triumph. "This is a serious violation of community safety standards," she announced. "Your livestock has endangered residents, and as a result, you are being fined $1,500. I stared at her, then at my goats who were now calmly munching on someone's perfectly manicured lawn. "Linda, my fence was cut. Someone trespassed on my property and deliberately let them out." Her lips pursed, eyes glinting with artificial sympathy. "Well, accidents happen, but the responsibility ultimately falls on you. You need to remove your animals immediately." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. This was not just about my goats. This was them pushing me, testing how far they could go before I broke. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. I herded my goats back onto my land, spent the afternoon repairing my fence, and thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next attack came 3 days later. I turned on my kitchen faucet expecting the usual clear stream of well water, but nothing came out, not a drip. I checked the pipes, the pump, everything I could think of. Then my phone buzzed with an email notification from the HOA. "Due to excessive water usage, your supply has been temporarily suspended. For further information, please contact the Community Resource Board." Excessive water usage, that was their excuse. I stormed to the nearest county office, demanding to know how my private well water could be shut off by a homeowners association I was not even a part of. The clerk looked confused, pulled up my records, and confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had no authority over my water supply. They had reported me for unauthorized farming activities, claiming I was draining community resources. Based on their complaint, someone had shut off my access pending further review. By the time I got back to my land, my patience was gone. I was done playing defense. That night, as I sat on my porch, under the dim glow of my lantern, I thought about every move they had made so far. The fake zoning claim, the fines, the fence sabotage, the water shutoff. They were trying to make my life unbearable, to drown me in nonsense until I had no choice but to give up. But they had underestimated me. A few days later, the next letter arrived. This time, they were not just demanding I get rid of my goats. They were ordering me to demolish my barn and my storage shed, claiming they violated community aesthetic standards. That was the last straw. I had played nice. Now it was time to fight back. I had spent weeks dealing with their nonsense. The fines, the sabotage, the threats. They had cut my fence, fined me for my own goats escaping, shut off my water, and now they wanted me to tear down my barn and storage shed because they did not fit their so-called aesthetic standards. It was all part of their game. They wanted to make my life miserable, to break me down until I had no choice but to give up and hand over my land. But they had made one crucial mistake. They thought I was just some stubborn farmer who would eventually fold. What they did not know was that I had just found their weakness. I had spent the last few days making phone calls, digging through records and talking to the right people, and what I discovered changed everything. The HOA was not as invincible as they pretended to be. In fact, they were in serious financial trouble. Their office building, the headquarters where they held their meetings, stored their documents, and issued their ridiculous fines, was in deep debt. They had not paid their property taxes for over a year, and the county was getting ready to put it up for auction. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. I did not just need to fight back. I needed to take them down for good. I kept my mouth shut and acted like I was still struggling under their pressure. I continued to respond to their letters with carefully worded legal jargon, forcing them to waste their time and resources trying to push through complaints that had no legal standing. I made them go through as much paperwork as possible, slowing them down at every turn. Meanwhile, I was working behind the scenes to line up everything I needed to buy their building the moment it went up for sale. I was not going to let them see it coming. The auction date was set, and I made sure to be there bright and early. The room was filled with a handful of investors looking to scoop up distressed properties for cheap. Then, sure enough, a few HOA board members arrived, including Linda. She looked confident at first, but I could tell she was nervous. The HOA needed that building. Without it, they had no place to operate, no central hub to issue their fines, no space to intimidate homeowners into compliance. The bidding started, and I let the process play out at first. The HOA placed their bid, clearly pushing the limits of their budget. I could see them sweating, whispering among themselves, trying to figure out how much they could afford. Then, when the moment was right, I tripled their bid. The entire room went silent. Linda turned, scanning the crowd until her eyes landed on me. Her face twisted in shock. She had not even noticed I was there. She whipped around and whispered frantically to the other board members. They placed another bid, but it was weak, barely above their last one. I let them believe they had a shot for about 30 seconds before I doubled my own bid again. This time, they did not respond. They had nothing left. The auctioneer called for any more bids. Silence. Then the final call. Sold. I had just bought the HOA's headquarters. I walked up to sign the paperwork, deliberately taking my time. As I passed Linda and the other board members, I gave them a slow, easy smile. I cannot wait to show you what I am going to do with the place. Linda's face turned an impressive shade of red. She looked like she wanted to scream but had no words. The other board members stood frozen, realizing what had just happened. I had taken away their command center, the very foundation of their power. By the time I got back to my farm, the news had already spread. Neighbors who had suffered under the HOA's tyranny for years were stopping by just to shake my hand and laugh about the situation. One guy even brought a bottle of homemade wine, grinning as he said, "You did what we all wanted to do for years." But the real fun was just beginning. The next morning I had a brand new sign put up right in front of the former HOA office. Large, bold, impossible to ignore. Future home of Goathaven Farm. Grand opening soon. Less than an hour after the sign went up, Linda and two of her most loyal board members stormed onto my newly acquired property, looking like they were about to explode. "This is completely unacceptable," she hissed. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed. "Oh," I asked, "what exactly is unacceptable about it? You cannot just turn our office into," she glanced at the sign, her eye twitching, "a goat farm." I shrugged. "Why not? It is my property now, and from what I hear, a lot of people in the neighborhood are excited about fresh goat milk and cheese." One of the board members, a wheezy-looking guy in a sweater vest, sputtered, "You do not have the right permits for this." I grinned and pulled out a piece of paper. "Actually, I do. Just got the zoning approval this morning. Turns out, since it is now private property, I can use it however I want, as long as it meets county regulations." Linda looked like she was about to have a stroke. "This is an insult to everything this community stands for." "Funny," I said, rubbing my chin, "because the community seems pretty happy about it." She turned around, finally noticing the group of homeowners who had gathered nearby to watch. A few of them started clapping, someone even cheered. That was when she realized she had no allies left. I watched as her confidence cracked, the realization setting in that she had lost. But she still tried to salvage what little authority she had left. "We will fight this," she said through gritted teeth. "We will challenge this sale and take back what belongs to the HOA." "Good luck with that," I replied, "because from what I understand, without an office, you do not really have an HOA anymore." Her face went pale, and then the final blow landed. One of the other board members, a guy who had been quietly standing in the background, stepped forward and muttered, "Linda, we cannot challenge it. We are broke." She whirled on him. "What do you mean we are broke?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. The HOA account was already drained, covering fines, legal fees, and the property taxes we could not pay. We do not have any money left, and now, with no office, we have nothing. The silence that followed was pure bliss. Linda's jaw clenched so hard I thought she might crack a tooth. She turned back to me, her eyes burning with pure hatred, but there was nothing left for her to say. I let the moment stretch out, just to enjoy the sight of her finally truly defeated. Then I gave her a friendly pat on the shoulder and said, "Well, if you ever need a job, I will be hiring farmhands soon. Goats need a lot of care, you know." That was the final straw. She let out a frustrated scream, spun on her heel, and stomped off. Her loyal followers awkwardly followed, looking like they had just witnessed the complete and utter collapse of their little empire. And just like that, the HOA was finished. The moment the HOA lost their office, the real collapse began. At first they tried to act like nothing had changed, sending out emails insisting that alternative arrangements were being made and that the community should remain patient while they secured a new space. But there was no new space. Without their headquarters, they had no central hub to hold meetings, no filing cabinets full of violation notices, no conference room where they could sit around a table and dream up new ways to make people miserable. They had lost their power, and the residents could smell the weakness. For years, homeowners had lived in fear of these people, afraid to push back, afraid of the fines, the threats, the constant surveillance over their lawns and mailboxes. But now, with the HOA scrambling and disorganized, people started to realize something important. There was nothing backing up the HOA's authority except the fear they had instilled. And once that fear was gone, there was nothing left holding the organization together. The first cracks started showing when homeowners stopped paying their fees. At first it was a trickle, just a few people here and there who had already been questioning why they were shelling out money to a group that no longer even had an office. Then more joined in. A neighbor down the road sent out a group email saying he had spoken to a lawyer who confirmed that without an official meeting place or the ability to enforce penalties, the HOA could not legally collect dues. That was all it took. Within a week, the trickle became a flood. Payments stopped coming in. The HOA bank account, already drained from legal fees and failed attempts to fight me, was drying up fast. Then the resignations started. First, the treasurer quit. He made a dramatic exit, sending out a statement claiming he had been kept in the dark about the HOA's financial issues and would not be held responsible for their mistakes. The next week, another board member stepped down, citing stress and personal reasons, which was code for "I am abandoning ship before this thing sinks completely." The remaining members scrambled to keep things together, but the writing was on the wall. The HOA was dying, and everyone could see it. But the real blow came when the homeowners decided they had had enough. A group of them held a private meeting without the HOA and began discussing the process of dissolving the organization entirely. Word spread quickly, the momentum grew. They gathered signatures, got legal advice, and within weeks, a full-on movement had formed. I was not invited to the meeting where the final vote was cast, but I heard all about it afterward, apparently. Linda made one last desperate attempt to save herself. She stood in front of the group, red-faced and furious, ranting about how the neighborhood needed structure, how without rules, everything would fall apart, but no one cared. The vote was cast, the decision was final. The HOA was officially disbanded. The aftermath was glorious. Almost overnight, it was like a weight had been lifted from the entire neighborhood. People who had lived under the HOA's thumb for years suddenly found themselves free. No more ridiculous violation notices, no more petty fines, no more power-tripping board members telling them what color their front doors had to be. Some residents even went out and tore down the old HOA signs as a symbol of their newfound freedom. There was a sense of celebration in the air, a kind of quiet rebellion as people repainted their houses in colors that had previously been banned, put up decorations that would have once been considered eyesores, and parked their vehicles wherever they pleased. One guy down the street threw a block party. He told me later that he had wanted to do it for years but had been too afraid of getting fined for noise violations. Now, without the HOA breathing down his neck, he invited the whole neighborhood, and people showed up in droves. Someone even brought a cake with the words "Rest in Peace, HOA" written in frosting. I got multiple invitations to bring my goats for a guest appearance, and I happily obliged. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing children laughing and playing in a neighborhood that had once been strangled by rules and restrictions, all while my goats wandered around happily, completely unaware of the chaos they had indirectly helped bring to an end. As for Linda, she disappeared. One day she was sending out frantic emails trying to rally support, and the next she was gone. Rumor had it she moved to a different neighborhood, probably in search of another HOA to take over. No one missed her. The few remaining board members who had not already fled either faded into obscurity or publicly distanced themselves from the disaster, acting like they had never really been involved in the first place. Meanwhile, my farm shop thrived. The old HOA office, once a symbol of control and oppression, had been transformed into something actually useful. People who had once been forced to visit that building to pay fines and contest citations were now stopping by to buy fresh goat cheese and honey. Some of them even set up lawn chairs outside just to watch, as former HOA loyalists drove by and saw what had become of their beloved headquarters. The irony was almost too perfect. One afternoon, as I was stocking shelves, I noticed someone standing just outside the shop, hesitating. It was Richard, one of Linda's former board members. He had always been quieter than the rest, never quite as aggressive, but still loyal to the HOA's rule. I raised an eyebrow, waiting to see what he wanted. After a long pause, he cleared his throat and muttered, "I need a job." I nearly laughed out loud. After everything, after all the fines, the threats, the harassment, one of them was now standing in front of me, asking for work. The poetic justice was almost too much. I leaned against the counter and studied him. "You know, I never thought I would see the day." He sighed, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I just need something stable. I was never really into all that HOA stuff. I just kind of went along with it." I let the silence stretch just to watch him squirm a little. Then finally I shrugged. "All right, you can work here." His face lit up with relief, but before he could thank me, I added, "But you report to the goats first." He blinked. "Wait, what?" "You wanted a job?" I said, fighting back a grin. "Well, the first job around here is taking care of the goats, cleaning stalls, feeding them, making sure they are happy." He hesitated, clearly debating whether or not it was worth it, but he must have really needed the work because after a long pause he finally nodded. "Fine." I could not have asked for a better ending. As the weeks went by, the last remnants of the HOA's rule faded into memory. People fixed up their homes the way they wanted to, without having to ask for permission. Kids played on lawns that had once been considered violations. Neighbors helped each other without the fear of receiving a complaint letter in the mail. One day, while sitting outside my farm shop, sipping a cold glass of fresh goat milk, I spotted Linda. She was standing at a nearby farmer's market stall, selling handmade candles. She looked different, less polished, more frazzled. She caught sight of me, and for a brief moment we locked eyes. I could tell she was still bitter, still angry that she had lost. She glared at me like it was all my fault. I simply raised my glass in a mock toast and smiled. "No hard feelings, Linda." Her nostrils flared, and without a word she turned away. I leaned back in my chair, watching her walk off, and took another sip of my drink. Victory never tasted so sweet. With the HOA officially dissolved and Linda gone, life on my farm settled into a peaceful rhythm that almost felt surreal. The war was over, and I had won. My goats roamed freely across the land that was once the target of endless fines and threats. My farm shop was thriving, a place where neighbors who had once whispered in fear of the HOA now gathered to chat, share stories, and celebrate their newfound freedom. The irony was almost poetic. What used to be the HOA's command center, the place where they issued citations and controlled every inch of the neighborhood, was now the heart of something real, something useful. People stopped by not just to buy fresh goat cheese and honey, but to relish in the fact that the nightmare was finally behind them. One afternoon, while setting up a new display of fresh eggs, I noticed someone lingering by the entrance. It was Richard, my new farmhand and former HOA board member. He had come a long way from the stiff, rule-forcing bureaucrat he once was. He adjusted his work gloves and cleared his throat. "Got all the stalls cleaned?" he said, avoiding eye contact. "Goats are fed too." I nodded, amused. "Good. They like you." He huffed, shaking his head. "Never thought I would be shoveling goat crap for a living." I grinned. "Never thought I would own the HOA office either, but here we are." Later that evening, as I sat on my porch sipping a glass of fresh goat milk, I spotted Linda in the distance. She was at the farmer's market, selling homemade candles, looking far less polished than she once had. For a brief moment our eyes met. She glared at me, resentment still burning, but I could see something else too. Defeat. She had lost, and she knew it. Without a word, she turned and walked away. I lifted my glass in a silent toast. "No hard feelings, Linda." As I took another sip, the sun dipped below the horizon, the fields bathed in gold, my goats peacefully grazing. The battle was over, and victory had never tasted so sweet.